Skull. 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 I hate doing this. Why am I doing this? Skull. Hello, folks. Welcome to Jeremy Hadler's YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jeremy Hadler. And today I'm going to be talking about the greatest player in Vikings franchise history. Yuck. Why am I discussing this? Oh, wait, this is the GOAT series. I got to discuss it. Ugh. This will be a painful episode to go through. Skull. Oh, gosh. Now I'm becoming a Vikings fan. Yuck. I mean, the greatest player in Vikings franchise history has to be Blair Walsh or Anderson or maybe Brett Favre, who threw that interception to the Saints and sent them to win the Super Bowl. I don't know. Those are my options right off the bat. All right. Let me discuss the whole criteria once again here, folks, as we're into episode 4 of this series here, folks, of the NFC North. Still continuing here of our last episode of the NFC North. They'll be heading over to the NFC East, and we'll be first going through the Philadelphia Eagles then. But in this episode, so a reminder, folks, we got 5 people of candidates, and then we got 1 honorable mention. And at the end of the episode, I choose who my ultimate GOAT is. The way I constructed this of my candidates is through accomplishments, achievements, what they did on the field, discussing their talents and their abilities playing on the field. Those are some of the key things that we're looking at. And their stats, too. Let's not forget that. You also got to include those key stats. Let's start off with our honorable mention. Honorable mention I have is the motor mouth, John Randall, the guy who put face paint all over himself. That's what he's known for. When I ever see a photo of him, that's everything I see of him, is he putting face paint all over himself for the game. Played 11 seasons for the Minnesota Vikings. He's a Hall of Famer. He had 6 first-team All-Pros, 6 Pro Bowlers, 1-time sacks leader, made the Vikings Ring of Honor. Stats, folks: 556 total tackles, 137.5 sacks, 29 forced fumbles, 11 fumble recoveries. And with John Randall, he was a game changer, a wrecker. He had a fierce of emotion and leadership out there on the field with the high energy and the fear is what I like to describe him as, because as I mentioned the face paint, he would get into the fear of quarterbacks like Brett Favre. As Brett Favre once mentioned, he was one of the scariest players he faced because he was just dominant. So John Randall, once again, is a fierce, high-energy guy that I really look at him as a great player and all of that. Fortunately, I didn't put him higher on my list just because I didn't think he didn't have more stats. That's the reason why. He wasn't that much of a dominating player as some of these other guys were that became very known for Vikings franchise history. But this is the one defensive player that always sticks out to me for the Vikings, especially on the pass rush end. That's the one guy that sticks out to me. So I'm going to put John Randall right here. Amazing career, motor mouth, played great, but unfortunately, I just couldn't put him up where the rest of you guys are. Next player I have is Randall McDaniel, a former guard, folks, for the Minnesota Vikings, who played 12 seasons with them. He's a Hall of Famer, set the record of a streak of 202 consecutive starts during his career. That was the NFL record for a little bit. Had 7 first-team All-Pros, 2 second-team All-Pros, 11 Pro Bowls. Now, the things about Randall McDaniel is he was very good at screen blocking. He was very good at that. Also good at sending people to the ground when bulldozing them. A very strong guy. He was a very big, muscular man and just sent him to the ground. That's the thing that sticks out to Randall McDaniel. I mean, I think he stood out more and had more of an impact with the Vikings, not just because of how many first-team All-Pros he had, but just how consistent he was, knocking guys to the ground. And if you need a guy to make a block for you for a running back or quarterback on the offense for the Vikings, he was your guy. He would help you. If you need that 1-yard line and you're going for a push, he's the guy to help you out there. So I really like Randall McDaniel. Again, very good at screen pass blocking, sending people to the ground, and very strong guy. Bulldozing is what he's really known for. So I give him a lot of credit here, especially with his achievements. I mean, there's not really much stats for an offensive line. You really can't go off that. But Randall McDaniel put up a great career, and he's a Hall of Famer. He's a Hall of Famer, folks. So I'm going to put Randall McDaniel here. All right, next player on my list I got is Frank Tarkenton. Frank Tarkenton played 13 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings, won 1 MVP. He was a 1-time Offensive Player of the Year, 1-time first-team All-Pro, 1 second-team All-Pro, 5 Pro Bowlers, 1-time passing yards leader, 1-time passing TDs leader, 1-time completion percentage leader, made the Ring of Honor in the Vikings. He got his number retired, number 10 with the Vikings. And he's a Hall of Famer. He led the Vikings to 3 Super Bowls, but he did not win any of them. But he got the Vikings very far in his career. His stats, folks, which the completion percentage and his stats are a little bit different than you would see compared to today, which is 57.7 completion percentage, not great, 33,098 passing yards, 239 passing TDs, 80.1 passer rating. Now, again, The stats were very different for quarterbacks way back then than it is now, where it's mostly more accurate and you see more good, like very good numbers. Whereas back then, Frank Tarkenton was a wild stallion, I like to call him, because he was very agility throw, and he was one of the first guys to throw outside the pocket, set the tone for quarterbacks, and revolutionize that position. Like today, you see with Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. You see all these like good quarterbacks nowadays here. They got that because of Frank Tarkenton, because Frank Tarkenton was the guy who started from rolling outside the pocket and throwing it. He was one of the main guys that did that. So he's a very good player of his agility too. And he's very quick. He has very good intelligence too when knowing what to be thrown at him on the defensive side. He's able to extend plays, like I just mentioned. He has good feet work and mobility and ability. Just again, he had great stuff with that. And let's also not forget, he had great ability and accuracy. I mean, despite the completion percentage, he had pretty good accuracy of throwing that football down the field and able to read defenses, like I mentioned. Reminds me a little bit of Aaron Rodgers of like knowing the kind of play. This is like Aaron Rodgers here. So I think Frank did a phenomenal job. Unfortunately, he did not get to win the championship with the Vikings. Thank you. He did me a solid as a Packers fan, but he did do a great job, and he's one of the best quarterbacks in quarterback history, and definitely up here on this list for the Vikings. He deserves to be up here, especially helping them get very far too. So I like to put Frank Tarkenton right here. Next player. This player played 11 seasons for the Minnesota Vikings. That is Alan Page. Alan Page, one-time NFL champion, won an MVP, one-time MVP, because he was defensive tackle, and you don't see that out of defensive players that get it. But the fact that Alan Page got it is amazing. He's a two-time Defensive Player of the Year, 5 first-team All-Pro, 3 second-team All-Pro, 9 Pro Bowls. Amazing to see that. His stats, folks, 108.5 sacks. He was a part of the Purple People Eaters. That's what he was a part of. The Purple People Eaters. He was a part of that because that's what the defense was called back then, and he was one of the main guys that led that. And to continue with his stats, he had 19 fumble recoveries. Now, they didn't have sacks that much as back in the day as what they would like to, but this is what Pro Football Reference mentioned because sacks back in the day weren't really officially counted. They were technically counted, but not really officiated till like the 80s. But this is what you got out of the NFL history and the rules records back then. So this is what I could find about him. But let's talk about his game. He's a tenacious pass rusher. He was a very good run stopper. He got often double teamed so much from the offense, with the offense line going after him, but he was still able to break through that a lot. His ability to get through the blocks and power through, like I just mentioned, run stuffer. He was a nightmare for quarterbacks and running backs, just like to try and get after him and sack him too, which was amazing to see that. And the interesting thing I like to mention about Alan Page was his versatility. He was able to adjust of like they're going pass zone a little bit. He was able to do that, but really he was known for of his like stopping the run, of the versatility and adaptable of stopping the run when he had to and getting after the quarterback when he had to also. And an interesting fact I'd like to bring up about Alan Page was he was an associate justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, which is pretty cool in my opinion because you don't see football players get into politics that much. But the fact that he played football and also became like a Supreme Court judge for Minnesota was pretty cool. I like to say that though. But Alan Page, he was the first defensive player to win the MVP award for a defensive player, which is awesome to see that. And he's one of the greatest defensive linemen, as I mentioned in last season about him. He was one of the best. Amazing player, and he most doubtly deserves to be on this list. He has to be on this list, considerable for me, especially when you're part of the Purple People Eaters. That's a rare nickname, but you got to be part of the Purple People Eaters. You got to be part of that. So I'm going to put Alan Page on this list here. All right, next player. This guy played 12 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. That is Paul Krause, safety. Now, he's a 1 first-team All-Pro, 3 second-team All-Pros, made 6 Pro Bowls, made the Hall of Fame, made the Vikings Ring of Honor. I also forgot to mention, folks, for this episode, that these stats are going to go based off of what they accomplished with the Vikings franchise history, not in total of their careers of where they went to somewhere like the Bears or some other team. We're not counting that. We're only counting their franchise stats here with that team. So to go back with Paul Krause, he had 53 interceptions, 2 fumbles, 11 fumble recoveries. 53 interceptions. You're lucky if you get maybe 3 interceptions in a season for a player. 53 with the Minnesota Vikings is insane. He does hold the record for most interceptions, which is 65, which is still insane. Still insane to me how he has 53 interceptions. Quarterbacks back in the day, they threw a lot of picks, and that's why, as I showed with Frank Tarkenton, it's not good completion percentage. A lot of interceptions were thrown back in the day too. So you got to admit that, folks. You got to admit that. But the thing about Paul Krause was he was gifted with speed and range, and he established himself as a defensive force against opposing receivers. So if receivers trying to go after and try to beat him, break through it, and get around him, Paul Krause was just one step ahead. He would be one step ahead and either knock the pass or intercept it. He just beat him to his game. He just beat him. And Paul Krause is an amazing player, gifted with so much talent, and great dude. Great dude, had great insight of what was going to happen. He just had very good vision, too. He had very good vision. So got to put Paul Krause here. Last player on the list here, before I get to my overall greatest Viking player of all time, is Randy Moss. Randy Moss played 11 seasons with the Minnesota Vikings. You would have thought he played more. You would have thought he played more. He's in the Hall of Fame. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year, his rookie year, 3 first-team All-Pros, 5 Pro Bowls, 3-time receiving touchdowns leader, made the Vikings Ring of Honor. He has the most receiving TDs in a rookie season. That's 17. His stats, folks: 587 catches for 9,316 receiving yards, scored 93 touchdowns. The thing about Randy Moss, there's 2 things that always stick out to me. A, don't get mossed because he'll beat you. He'll literally just put his hands over you and catch the ball somehow. And his dancing. His dancing is what stood out to me a bit. Now, the one key thing about Randy Moss I always remember his dance for is the one against the Packers where he pretends he's going to go use the bathroom on the Packers logo. Yeah, that was disgusting. I still hate you to that. And Joe Buck can still recall that. That's disgusting. But overall, Randy Moss was a dynamic player, special. He made defenders look silly. He just beat them one-on-one, like I mentioned with Paul Krause getting on receivers. Randy Moss would just make those CBs and the safeties go like, I don't know how to play football. He was just that kind of player and helped lead the Vikings to great success. They were very close to going to the Super Bowl one year, but unfortunately that didn't happen due to a missed field goal. But Randy Moss did a lot of things for the Vikings, and he had a great time. He had a great career with the Vikings, and I got to put him here on this list. I just have to put him here on this list. Now to get to my choice of who I think the greatest Viking player is of all time, I think it comes down to 3 players here: Frank Tarkenton, Randy Moss, and Alan Page. I really think it comes down to those 3 because Frank Tarkenton, greatest quarterback in Vikings franchise history, which Vikings quarterbacks are rarely good. I mean, you can go ask Brett Favre that question. Alan Page, Alan Page was a wrecker. He did so many great things with the Vikings, and Purple People Eaters really sticks out to me. I like that nickname. As a Packers fan, I'm scared of that, but I just find it funny as an NFL fan. I find that pretty cool. And then my other player is Randy Moss. Moss. You're going to get mossed. Me personally, I have to go with Randy Moss here because, A, you couldn't stop the guy. You couldn't stop the other guys too, but Randy Moss, I feel like, made more of an impact of scoring a lot more TDs, being more of a threat to defenses, and defenses were scared of him, and he just dominated. He dominated the game. His rookie year to the end of his Viking career, just amazing to see that. So personally, I got to give it to Randy Moss. How dominant he was. Like, look at the receiving touchdowns here. He was 3 times of that. He had 93 touchdowns for the Vikings. Don't get mossed. Don't get mossed. Make defenders go silly, and a dynamic player too. Had over 9,000 receiving yards. Amazing to see that. So personally, I got to give it to Randy Moss here. I think he's the greatest Vikings player of all time. So I'm going to leave it to Randy Moss. But that'll do it here, folks. Let me know your thoughts here of who do you think the greatest Vikings player of all time is? Do you think it should be not Randy? Do you think it should be Paul Krause, Frank Tarkenton, Alan Page? Should it be someone else in the honorable mention instead of John Randall, or should John Randall got more appreciation? Should he? I don't know. Let me hear your thoughts, guys. Let me hear your thoughts of who you think the greatest Viking is of all time. That was terrible witness, folks. That was terrible as a Packers fan. Yuck. But Randy Moss, again, greatest Viking. But again, Randy Moss, greatest player in Vikings franchise history. I got to give it to you. But until next, that'll do it here for the Vikings episode. Thank goodness we're done with the NFC North for the Vikings side. Now we're going to head to the NFC East, the Philadelphia Eagles, with a special guest. So stay tuned for that. But that's a wrap in the studio, folks. We'll see you next time. And as always, go Pack Go. We are not rooting for the Vikings. Go Pack Go.